Hi, everyone, and welcome to Buzzworthy Live. Today, we're flipping the script on something associations often get boxed into video as just a marketing play. But what if your next video wasn't about promotion at all, but about solving real problems, recruitment, outreach, or perhaps more importantly, member value? Our guest today is Tony Curvina from AS&T. She's a seasoned association leader who's led award-winning video projects, overseeing major content strategy overhauls, and shaping how AS&T uses video and learning to drive real impact for their members and their field. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you. Great to be here with you.
So let's just jump right in. Tony, your team has been shifting towards purpose-driven storytelling. What was the moment you realized that your team needed to think differently about video, and what was broken about how the old approach was executed?
Yeah, for us, it wasn't even necessarily a moment. It was a series of conversations over about a year. I think that really led us to where we are now. And it wasn't in that we started with the product as the problem. We have been producing tons of content for years and years, but we realized that, it was really more operational and our content wasn't necessarily landing and giving us that sustained member value and ROI we had enjoyed previously. And so we started to look at our content in general. So, in traditional associations, a lot of the times the approach is siloed and department driven. The department produces a program, a product, a service. And not a lot of the time do those programs speak to one another. They certainly don't speak to a high level organizational strategies and mission. And so we started to see, how do we shift that? So we created a content department so we could bring those discussions together and start to bring the content together in such a way that it flipped the script on how we're producing and even thinking about content. We're starting with the product and the end result, but shifting that mindset to organizational challenges and mission, looking at our strategic plan and starting to think, what are the topics that matter to our members? How do each of the sections of our membership speak to those different challenges, and dividing that into segmentation and personas? Where is the audience? And then what is the format that they are most likely to engage with? And that's when we started about things like video. And then where are their watering holes? Where can we engage with them? And that's going to be different for everybody. And so it's kind of a puzzle to start thinking in those terms, and really a reverse of how we've been doing things before. And that led us to thinking about video as its own part of our content strategy, and allowing us for the first time to think about these products not just as these one-offs, but really as part of a whole to start solving these member problems. And that led us to thinking about, how do we produce video? How do we create it as part of an indispensable part that no other format can really speak to in the same way? There are certain things about videos that lend itself to the visual representation, that lend itself to telling is such a huge part, I think, of associations. You know, when you talk to members, they're all so passionate about what they do, and all they want to do is share their stories. And so now we had a platform, an outlet for them to do that. And so it was really great for us to kind of turn the film camera over to them and let them tell for themselves what is so great about our association, about the industry. And so it's really now become such a huge part of our content strategy that we love having it in our arsenal, despite the fact that we don't necessarily have a dedicated video department. We don't have a production team in house, but because we're thinking about it holistically, we're still able to have that success with it.
I think that's really fascinating. It's so often that associations think as video as just a format, right? And often within the context of, we're going to push something out and we're going to try and motivate people to take a specific type of action. That's kind of really the traditional mindset of using video, is really in a marketing comms kind of perspective. And it's so interesting to hear how your team was able to get to a point where you're thinking about, well, maybe the content that we're producing, video or otherwise, content more holistically, how does that serve the member? And can we provide member value online, right? And serve it to our member? Because, right, you can only be with your members so many days of the year.
Right. It's not just about selling somebody every time you get their attention. And that I think was a lot of where our efforts had been, as you mentioned, marketing promotions, conference promotions, occasional interviews. But at the end of the day, we really want somebody to engage with us, to take an action. We want people to sign up for membership and buy a thing. But we realize we can use it as an informational and educational tool to help with that added member value, which in turn helps with member retention because now they have something that builds onto their professional development. Now we have tools that help them go into their community as ambassadors and advocates for the industry. And so it's not just about selling, it's about teaching and giving them something that they're able to either internalize within their own professional industry or to in turn speak to others. And so that was a really nice thing for us to be able to start empowering our members with new tools as well as showcasing to them maybe parts of the industry that they weren't previously aware of, because we have these different segments and they don't always interact with one another. So that problem solving aspect has been really helpful for us in starting to look at what can we give of value to our members that this video as a format delivery will solve that some of our other informational outputs like an article or a conference session were not necessarily meeting that need.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to focus on. If you spend time at conferences in the association space or you read reports on the association space, there's this through line, which is always this question of engagement. Like it's this mystical thing that we're trying to solve for. And, I often say like solving engagement can be straightforward and it's just simply solving, can you deliver value to people? Because to expect people to engage with a thing or with your organization without thinking about value first, it ends up being a bit of a conundrum, right? Because you need one to have the other.
Exactly. I mean, it was in the past, we need a video for this, or this would be a really great video. And that was us thinking, oh, this will solve our members' problems. We're throwing spaghetti at the wall. We're telling everybody what they want to hear. And we know, all the people want the same thing. So this video is going to answer all of their needs. And of course, that's not the case. And so we really need to kind of take a step back and listen to our members because not every video is going to speak to every member. Not every form of a video or format channel. I mean, folks are on TikTok or folks are on YouTube or folks are on streaming services, and we have to be able to kind of adjust the messaging at the end of the day to those audiences in those different kind of playgrounds.
There's this idea that video builds trust for most associations, but they're still using it like a megaphone, like we mentioned. Tony, how did you start thinking about it from this perspective that we're talking about? That content, video can be used to provide value in that shift. Where did you arrive, or how did you arrive to that perspective?
Yeah, I think it's, just really stopping to listen. A big part of our content strategy development has been building out the personas and just sitting down and listening to our members and hearing them talk through not just where are they experiencing challenges with AS&T, but where in their own professional development are they seeing a need and where can we start to then speak to that need and perform, these gap analyses to say, okay, this group is telling us that they are, in need of this. And they may say, well, we want a video on this, but maybe that's not the right format.
Mm.
It's really starting first with that content topic. And when you start to listen to the member, the voice of the member is something that we always have in our ears, but we're not always distilling it in such a way that we turn it around and create this value that's not immediately recognizable as, a revenue producing product, but it's something that they're going to pay attention to. And then that will maybe over time make them more of a long time member. Maybe that will make them more of an evangelist or an advocate for your industry.
Right. So again, focusing on member value, can we increase the value, focus on improving the value of membership with something to drive that recruitment and retention side of important goals for any association, opposed to using content for something that's an immediate need, like selling a product. Right? We're going to generate X amount of revenue by having X amount of people buy access to a session or something like this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, one example I think that really spoke to our membership was our series that we called This is NDT, Technicians. So our technicians is one segment of our membership that previously had been somewhat underserved and underrepresented in our overall approach to producing product and content. A lot of our content was geared more towards the level threes or the supervisors. And so we realized there was this gap and this need. And so we worked with Worker to Be to produce these 6 videos in which 6 of our technicians from all over the country and even other parts of the world came on camera to tell their story. And so that had this really great kind of twofold effect for us in that it gave exposure to this group where they now felt more empowered to again share their stories with us, but also it highlighted the importance of this group to some of those other segments, our researchers, our engineers, our supervisors. And then in turn, it also had, a byproduct effect of being an advocacy tool for us. Because now when we're putting this on the internet and somebody comes across this series of videos, they have these 6 individuals who are all very different. They work in different industries, they all have different backgrounds. They're more likely to connect with and relate to somebody on the screen and might for the first time think, oh, this might be kind of a career path for me. Whereas if we're just speaking to somebody with a promotional video or sending out an ad, that's not going to land the same way. People really want to see that relatable voice of somebody that's speaking about what they love and what they're passionate about. And so that's what's been so great about our members as our mouthpiece, because they all are so passionate and we're able to showcase them in such a way that it speaks and lands with others.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic example of how you can use video to hit multiple objectives. Tell me, when you decided to make this shift, how did that play out in terms of really getting people on board? It must have been a bit of a challenge to get people to kind of flip their perspective on how video is going to be used, and really what the value can be from an operational perspective, um, to solving some of the things that the association is focused on. What was that shift like? How did that go internally with your team? Um, was it a challenge to kind of get everyone to shift their perspective and roll this out?
Yeah, I mean, it was an overall shift, I think, that went along with the rollout of the entire content department because all of a sudden we were turning on our lens on all of the different program areas and starting to see how can we start to connect the dots between each of them. And that's kind of been one of our inside jokes is that we're the connective tissue that holds some of the teams together because we're able to place these conversations and see where there's similarities and where can one effort complement another, where can a video over here really amplify an article over there. um, but for us, it starts with championing the cause. And so, if you're in a small team and you're starting out on your own, you can be that champion. If you have the buy-in from leadership early on, that goes a huge way. Because if you have a leader who's able to think strategically and see the long-term value of a content-first culture, they can then advocate for that both within staff and also to, your board, because you also want that member buy-in when you're drastically changing, these operations, how you're doing things, and able to validate and justify something to say, we're spending resources over here to produce something that may not have an immediate price tag on it, but over time we'll see the returns from that. And so it's been a shift over time, but I think people really are seeing that value. And it's also causing us to reevaluate our roles within the staff. And it's not just, I am, a book editor or I am a podcast host. It's more, there are content creators, there are content contributors. It has to be thought of more in this holistic way because, again, you're going to have to fit that puzzle together of what is the right topic, audience, format, distribution channel. And so getting people to think in that way is a little bit of a mindset shift, but it's so rewarding when people start to see, the connecting of the dots themselves, and then in turn pushing that outward to the membership. It really has a much stronger branding authority and messaging behind it.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. And it's so true that many associations, and we all talk about it, is that there's this siloing effect in many associations. Everyone talks about that. And it's interesting how content is a way of really breaking down those silos, right? When done effectively, because I guess to an analogy would be something like an annual event, or more traditionally, the physical publication, is that it was this thing that brought everyone together, um, for to create something that was valuable to members. But it was really a team effort to do those things. But producing content and pushing it out online is really no different in that regard. You really need this team effort. You need people thinking holistically about um, all the different aspects, and curating that for the member.
Yeah. Let me give you another example. So, one of the other things that needs to happen to make it, a content strategy successful is to be able to create modular content that has high reusability. Because again, that's going to have your branding, your voice, your authority, the messaging behind it. So, for example, another series that we worked on together was a series, 6 animated videos that showcase the most popular NDT methods, and at a very high level gave sort of this, fun visual depiction of the science behind radiographic testing, ultrasonic testing, tying it to real world examples that somebody might understand. What is an x-ray? Oh, it's like breaking your bone. And so those on their own stand alone as a 1 minute video. They stand alone as a playlist. But now we can also go to our education team and say, we have these chunks, so to speak, that you can now pull a clip of and put in an educational course. And yes, even though it's rudimentary and foundational, it's still showcasing technology, which is sometimes subsurface or hard to visualize, that you can put in an online asynchronous course. You can send it to your workforce team that can go to the schools. And now you have something for the teachers and the guidance counselors to play in a class. We put together a series of classroom videos that we've plugged in clips from this video series as well. So all of a sudden, you get this long, sustained uh, output and return from one single piece of content. And that's been so great, but you have to be able to see the value across other teams. It's the same with jobs of tomorrow. We start with the long form piece of content, the 20-minute video. Then you have, the micro learning clips. That is a more targeted approach to the same content that maybe speaks to your membership versus the general public that's engaging on the streaming service. And then you have the social media clips, which there's your promotional aspect, so you can have that angle, but then also the member profiles. And the member profiles, again, you've got that storytelling aspect. So you've got members that see people like them, and then you've got potential members that see people like them.
Yeah, let's jump into that a little bit. Um, you've been using video for workforce challenges. Do you want to expand on that a little bit for the audience at home? And how does that connect with recruitment, retention, and advocacy?
Yeah. So Our workforce challenge has been ongoing, and I think a lot of associations and industries see this as well. A lot of our industry is aging out. And so it's our traditional methods of reaching people, which a lot of times has been word of mouth or kind of more traditional platforms, is not as effective. We're seeing drops in our numbers. We're seeing a difference in the way that not only people want to join as members, but engage as volunteers. And so we have to kind of tweak our strategy to allow people to engage with us in a way that speaks to them, and maybe going out into some of the platforms that we haven't been previously to get people's attention. Because at the end of the day, it's just a fight for attention. And how do we differentiate ourselves from everybody else in the STEM industry who's trying to attract the same group to a similar career? Right. And so, again, having the storytelling aspect of the members speak from themselves, and like the technicians videos and the jobs of tomorrow, that really gives somebody a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of what NDT is, because it is so hard to advocate for something that nobody's heard of. Everybody's heard of welding, nobody's heard of NDT. But now you pair the interviews with some footage of people doing stuff in the field, and it's really cool stuff. It's people on the top of skyscrapers and underwater doing this testing. And all of a sudden, people are like, oh, that could be something for me. And it's not something that I'm seeing in the schools, but here is this, avenue that's being presented to me. And then we can kind of capitalize on those leads and bring people in, because we really want to be looking at the entire life cycle of the member, right? We need the pathways to bring them in. We need the resources to give them when they first join us, to say, this is what we're all about. And then as they shift throughout their career, speaking to those different segments again with our content, and making sure we have a piece of content that is attractive and lands with the managers and the CEOs and the people that are retired. How can they continue to advocate for us and find value in us once their professional career is done? And so that's where we're looking to start to plug in different parts of the content strategy, different videos. And so the workforce has been important. Our advocacy efforts, we now have an advocacy workforce department. We've been using video to bring to Capitol Hill, to showcase to
Mm.
legislators. This is what NDT is. And we're tweaking the messaging now. It's not just this is what NDT is, but this is why it matters to you as a legislator, for your constituents, because it's about safety and the economic impact of it. And so you have at its core the same message overall, but you just start to tweak it for these different groups. And in doing so, you can start to reach out beyond the ecosystem of, just talking to yourselves and your members.
I think that example probably got a lot of people in the audience gears turning in terms of how these things can be effective in a lot of different avenues. If you were going to be giving someone advice and listening in the audience today, and they have that sense of, I want this, I want to do something like this, what would be your advice in terms of taking that first step and making a shift inside of their organization to, use video differently in the way that you've been talking about today?
Yeah. Okay. So I have a few, maybe three pieces of advice, I think. So, first off, I would say, like we've been talking throughout, don't start with this would make a great video. It's a little bit of a systemic shift, and sometimes it takes time to move mountains. But I promise it's worth it if you start just having the conversations about what does it mean to use video for this specific purpose? What is the mission? What are the objectives of your organization? And then how do you start to build the strategy and the content around that? So that's one piece. Second, be the champion. If this is something that you see as important and you see value in, be that champion. Try to find, use cases within your realm of influence, and then that will start to gain traction, among staff, among your peers, leaders, then eventually maybe the governance boards. Um, and then lastly, we talk a lot about how we've been partnering together on all these projects, and understanding that people have all different staff sizes, budgets, time and priorities. We're a very small staff. We only, have maybe five or so people that are content creators, right? But we see the value in producing video at this high level production quality, but also doing smaller one offs, because that's the thing. Anybody can get started with video right away. And there is that spectrum, I think, of video production quality that is applauded. If you look at some of the social media platforms and you see this very imperfect, raw, footage that's
Hmm.
being uploaded, but it lands with people because it's authentic, and people trust it, even though it's not quite, polished enough. And then as you start to see some returns on that, you look at your metrics. Okay, people are interested in this, not this. Then you start to build from there. Okay, maybe we'll invest in, a camera, get a little bit more high tech in our equipment, and then you can scale out, continue going forward. If you want that high production quality, you work toward that. The scalability, I think, is really key, because if you start small and see the success, then you can know where to build out. And if you need to pivot, it's more easy to do so than having put all your video eggs in one basket over here, right? So that's kind of what I would say is, start now, just have the idea, and eventually that falling will come.
I think that's really good advice. It's a point that it's worth reiterating on is that, production value is a sliding scale. And what you said there really resonated with me in terms of this more scrappy, authentic content. Like, look, if it's video content that's supposed to represent, the organization as a whole, maybe it needs to have a little bit of extra production value. Or say you're really trying to invoke some sort of action, it needs to have something that's going to drive a sense of emotion for people to take that action. But in terms of delivering value, like, people really just want the information being given to them. And even if there's a bit of a storytelling component to that, because it's a member speaking about their experience or something like this, you know, that doesn't have to be a $30,000 Hollywood, movie to do that. And that isn't necessarily a reflection on like the quality or substance of the association. I think we all, as people collectively in our culture now, understand and recognize like this shifting scale in terms of production value, though most people don't think about it that way. There's definitely room where, hey, maybe you want to put some production value into this over here, but in terms of the content that our people are ingesting on a daily basis, um, it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg to do those things. And to get started and keep those budgets low and find what's resonating with your audience, I think is just great advice.
For sure. And if you can have a Hollywood budget, but if you don't have the right messaging, it's not going to land. And then you've just, misspent your money. So,
Exactly. So, Tony, I'd like to switch gears and take some questions from the audience. How's that sound?
sure, let's do it.
Okay, so our first question here is, how did you get your internal team, leadership, and other stakeholders on board with this shift? I think we touched on this a little bit, but is there anything that you'd like to add?
We did. I mean, I think pre-planning is key. Getting, if you have any influence in the budgeting cycle, get in there early. But then have a business case to back it up. Show what it can mean to do the scrappy style video up into the, highly polished Hollywood budget. If you have a very clear vision, it's a lot easier to get that buy-in. And if you can look to other associations and see what they're doing and point to their success, I think people will start paying attention.
I think that answer segues pretty good into this next question, which is, how did you measure success on less transactional and more educational video content?
Yeah, well, so of course, we can look to things like our vanity metrics and see how many people have clicked on and liked and shared a video. But we see a lot of the success, I think, in our anecdotal data when we see those comments from our members that are really excited. Oh, now I can share this with my friends and family, and I don't have to have the elevator pitch ready of what is NDT. It's really seeing, the excitement. If your member is excited about a piece of content that you're producing that might not even be for them, that's saying something. And so looking at our retention rates, looking at our sign up rates, and looking at like our lead generations, all of that put together again paints that kind of holistic picture.
We'll do one more question before we get out of here today. And this is an interesting one. how did you use video content to position corporate sponsors as thought leaders in ways that are educational, not sales pitchy?
Ooh, that's a good one. So that's an interesting thing, that we were able to work into like the Jobs of Tomorrow series, for example, because we recognize that our affiliate partners, they're no longer happy to just do print display advertising, right? That's not getting anybody's attention.
Mm,
Companies want to be thought leaders, and they want to be able to show their authority in the subject without necessarily just yelling in somebody's faces about buying their product. And so we give, again, people, our members and our sponsors are a lot of the same people. So we're able to interview them and ask the same questions and get the same sorts of answers. But then when somebody looks to see, oh, well, this person is with this company, maybe I should see what this company is up to, because they're not trying to sell me on the thing. They're earning my trust right now by giving me information. So that's one way.
amazing. I think that's great advice. And hey, look, that's all the time that we have. I feel like we probably could have spent 15 minutes answering that last question because it's such a huge topic, but that's all the time that we have for today. Tony, thanks for joining us again. Where's the best place for people to find about you, follow you, and find more about your work?
Yeah, thanks so much. So feel free to email me on the contact here. I love talking about this stuff, as you can tell. So I'm more than happy to talk through what we found that works and what doesn't work. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. So yeah, please reach out if you have any questions.
Amazing. Be sure to do that. Tony, is always a pleasure to speak with you. Uh, and thanks to our viewers at home for joining us today. If you missed anything from our last session with James Young from the product community, you can find his on demand video that we've published. That link will be on our website. You can find it on our platform. And to everyone, have a great day, and we'll see you next time on Buzzworthy Live.